today as well. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm a little out of practice. Haven't been here for a little while. We do excuse Councilmember Shipley, who is traveling. Sure. To what point? Everything.
It'll be better in a couple months.
Take two. All right, here we go again. Welcome to the Provo Municipal Council work meeting. It's Tuesday, June 7th at 1:06 p.m. Members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at the Provo City Center. I remind participants to mute your microphones when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. Today we have council members Whipple, Ellsworth, Hoban, Hanley, Fillmore, McKay, and also several members of staff, and Wayne Parker, our CAO. Councilmember Shipley is excused for previously scheduled trip. Our opening prayer today will be by our intern, Mark Ayo. All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the blessings that I was given. Thank you for this opportunity to gather together at this work meeting. We pray for thy guidance and thy support as we continue to find ways to help the city become a better place to live, work, and play. We ask thee for special blessing of thy spirit, that through this meeting, we will come together and closer as a community. We pray for our families and loved ones, especially those who are sick and those who struggles. We pray for those countries who are struggling, that thou may bless and strengthen them. We love thee, Father, and all this we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark. All right, it is proposed we approve the following minutes, May 3rd, 2022 and May 17th, 2022. Are there any objections or requested changes? If not, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Although it is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions. Unless otherwise invited by the chair, please wait to speak until you are called on by the council chair. Our first item of business is a resolution imposing fire restrictions due to hazardous environmental conditions by Chief James Miguel, Fire Marshal Lynn Schofield. This is a 10-minute presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Hoban, members of the Municipal Council. Thankful to be here. Chief Schofield is actually, I think, on Zoom, but basically we're here today to ask for your blessing on this resolution where we close the wildland areas and basically all of the city to open burning, with the exception of recreational fire and cooking fires. This is something we do every year. We basically, this will eliminate any request for controlled burns, anything that may cause us a problem. It also gives us the ability to go out into areas like Rock Canyon and enforce the homemade fire rings and the desire to have campfires out in that area when they're not in an approved campsite.
Any questions?
I have a question about the date.
So by law, the fire marshal has the ability to do this with the concurrence of the municipal council. So he actually enacted that, and he needs the concurrence of the council. So we it just kind of had to do with how the dates fell. But basically, we would be it would be it was in effect. He has legal right to do this for a period of time without your without your blessing, and I apologize, I can't remember how long that time is, but this is the process we typically go through. And when things were warming up, we became concerned about it. We didn't expect the weather to change the way that it had, but we actually do anticipate. We've had fires in the state of Utah already. We anticipate that we will be in a situation that will be dangerous to us with 1 week of the weather that we're having right now. So,
Okay. I'm very supportive. It says Fire Marshal at the bottom. I think that's a fun name for Fire Marshal Lynn Schofield.
well, I'm not saying.
We have corrected that.
Okay.
Okay, I don't think we need to vote on anything or.
No, just we'll be back tonight
Okay.
for your
Thank you.
support. Thank you.
All right, the next is an ordinance amending Provo City Code to conform with Utah Code requirements regarding emergency meetings in the Provo City Municipal Council. Gary Millward, Deputy City Attorney, is with us today. Special guest appearance. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Chair. More like the B team, I would say, but I'm happy to be here and hopeful that I can be helpful. Ironically, I would have been here anyway for this item, so in some ways that works out well. This is relatively straightforward. I don't know that it requires a lot of exposition. Essentially, the city attorney asked me to take a look at Utah Code Section 524202 sub 5, which governs the calling of emergency meetings by municipal legislative bodies to see if it comported with our city code. The short answer is that it did not in its entirety. There's essentially two ways in which our city code is different. The first is that the notice required under our code is kind of broad and general, where under the Utah Code, we're supposed to give specifics of the topics that are going to be discussed at the emergency meeting. The other significant difference is that under our code, the chair could call an emergency meeting. That is not the case under state law. It requires a majority of the council in order to come into emergency session. So this proposed ordinance change brings the city code in conformity with those state requirements. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Doesn't look like there's any questions.
Thank you.
Did even better than Brian would have. All right, next item of business is a presentation regarding a general plan timeline update. Brandon Larson, there he is. Come join us at the stand, please. Oh, it looks like Bill's. Yeah, you defer to him when he's in the house, right? Yeah, I got you. All right, Bill Pepperoni, Development Services Director. Can't remember your title completely.
Close enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director of Development Services. There we go. Go ahead, Bill.
Members of the council, we're very pleased with the responsiveness of our citizens to the general plan survey. We had 901 responses. We're also very grateful for the help of Y2K for their professionalism in guiding us through this and for the help they gave us. The survey respondent groups correspond to demographic categories from the latest census. So for example, approximately 40% of Provo's population is in the 18 to 24-year-old cohort. So about 40% of the respondents for the survey came from that cohort. While the survey work has been going on, staff has proceeded on to complete the future land use map. In the draft general plan you have previously seen, the future land use map was included in the body of the plan. As this moves forward, staff would like to ask you to allow us to do what we've always done, and that is to have a general plan text like this, the 2010 plan, and then a general plan map, which is what this is. When you try to convey a map of this size and a document of this size, it becomes extremely hard to read and hard to interpret. So we're going to recommend that we continue to do that part of the general plan the way we've always done it. Also, while the survey's been going on, the staff has updated the annexation policy plan and the policy map. These documents will need to be appendices in the new general plan. The staff has continued with formatting and organization of the chapters for the new plan. One correction or change we'd like to make is that as you read the current draft of the general plan, there are housing goals and policies and objectives that are kind of spread out all through the plan. We'd like to create one housing chapter that puts all of those goals and policies in one place. We think it's going to be much easier for the citizens and activists to understand the plan and interpret it if we do that. According to recent change in state law, we now have to have a moderate income housing plan. We'd like to include that as a subsection to the housing chapter. Our work on the moderate income housing plan is virtually complete. What still has to happen is pretty minor formatting, editorial kind of stuff. But the general plan will not be delayed at all by adding a moderate income housing plan to that. As you know, the state law was also changed to now require us to have a water master plan as part of the general plan. The Public Works Department is working on that. Now that's a plan that could be a delay. That could take some time to complete. If it looks like that's going to delay this plan, that bringing forward the general plan, we won't delay the general plan for that. We'll come back and catch that and add that to the plan later. Although I'm sure Public Works is working vigilantly on that. The state law gives us till 2025 to complete that. So we don't want to hold up this process for that part of the plan. We anticipate that staff and Y2K will finish analyzing the data and will report back to the City Council within 30 days. At that time, staff will also outline steps for moving forward. Staff intends to bring the plan forward mid to late summer, depending on the impact of the survey results. The Conservation and Resiliency Plan will follow shortly after the general plan. The staff has been working on the conservation plan, taking input from the various departments while all the survey work and other things are going on. So that plan's also been being worked on and is moving forward. So that's kind of a status update of where we are to date. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Councilor Ellsworth.
I guess my primary question is, what is the public's participation in the water element that must be included in the general plan?
Any engineering plan, like the transportation plan, those have all come before the City Council for adoption. And before they can come to the City Council, they have to go through a public hearing. What type of public outreach Public Works will be doing as part of that master plan, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that, but it will have to go through a public hearing to become part of the general plan.
Okay, so we're not doing any, well, you don't know of any proactive outreach necessarily that would feed into that plan other than a typical public hearing.
I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I would be interested in the council maybe seeing earlier drafts of that instead of the final draft and getting the public involved in different ways. When the legislature, it's my understanding, correct me if you've heard otherwise, but when the legislature decided to implement a water element in the general plan, I know that there's a big element of infrastructure there, but I know that they're also very conscientious about every land use decision also being a water decision. So integrating land use and water beyond typical conveyance systems, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that's being captured.
We'll be meeting with engineering staff tomorrow in our CRC meeting, our weekly CRC. I'd be glad to convey to them that concern.
Other questions? Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Next item is an ordinance enacting Provo City Code Chapter 14.14D mixed use zone citywide application. This is presented by Javin. Haven't seen Javin in a while. Welcome back, Javin. Javin's a planner.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to go through quite a few things to this and explain quite a bit. I hope you can follow. If you can't, just ask me and I'm happy to clarify. A lot of our general plan policies talk about mixed use, various components of mixed use zones. I'm going to go down through each of these existing documents and how they specifically call it out. But our general plan, our current plan has it, our downtown master plan, the Mazer plan, Southwest Future Land Use Map, Franklin, Southeast, and Joaquin. The general plan currently says that we want to have the appropriate mix of density, appropriate areas to designate areas for higher density, reduce vehicle trips, and promote areas best suited for this. Downtown master plan encourages that we have the adequate transition between these types of areas. We encourage mixed use development and we want to have small scale services and offer office appropriate within these areas. Major neighborhood plan calls for adequate transition, small business, live work units, increased safety, transitional uses. You may see some overlap between these plans. Southwest Future Land Use Map calls for a mixed-use village center, which calls for commercial components to include residential, have a transition between there and the park, and the neighborhood gateway areas to encourage a mix of uses. Our Franklin neighborhood plan, similar type things, but one thing that I did notice, they had a goal saying that the second one down, no land use zone works to establish a center. We don't have a zone that's going to work to help facilitate this plan. Southeast, neighborhood plan talks about reducing vehicle trips, provide local conveniences, and having commercial nodes at 1320 and 1860 South. Walking neighborhood plan calls for a campus mixed use zone, which allows for mixed use within projects. Now, the map specifically calls out an area that it is required to have a commercial component. You know, as we looked at the zones, I felt like we don't really have a mixed use type of zone that works for other areas outside of these plans. That's kind of how these zones are drafted. Now, I just want to get you guys familiar with areas where mixed use could be permitted. Now, everywhere that's hashed over in the downtown neighborhood allows for mixed uses. On the right side, the orange color calls for mixed use corridor. Measure everything in the purple. So that's going to be along 6th South, between University and 4th East, and Center Street between 2nd and 4th East allow for mixed use development. Southwest Future Land Use Map, which you're very familiar with, the Geneva and Center Road area, and then also at 11th, 16th, maybe 2050, and other areas where there's a circle against Lakeview Parkway, and at 6th South and 2250 West. 2050 West. Franklin neighborhood, this calls for it at 300 South and 500 West. Southeast Future Land Use Map, I just wanted to highlight, we have a significant amount of residential, but we have the commercial nodes would be at 1320 and 1860 where those arrows are. And Joaquin, the area north at 7th North and up allows for campus mixed use, and actually a little bit between 6th and 7th. But the area that's purple says mixed use is required. I think it's really good to get familiar with these plans where these zones may or may not be applicable, so we can think contextually where these would come at a future date and time. Now, this is just to enact these land use zones. We're not proposing any zone changes today. This is going to be a similar type format as we did with the airport zones. We're going to call it mixed use zones, and it's just going to include the mixed use and the neighborhood mixed use. One is of higher intensity, one's a little bit lower intensity of uses. The permitted uses, these uses would be allowed without stipulation at all in both of these zones, apartments or condos, and they do need to include a 10,000 square foot commercial component, assisted living centers, live work dwelling units, one family dwellings, police, residential facilities, and villages. Now, if you are adjacent to an RC or R1 zone, then you would be allowed to have a one family dwelling or a two family dwelling. If you are, but if you're in the MU zone, then it would be a townhouse of 4. Just again to scale, and we want to be cognizant of where and how these will interact with existing areas of the city.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question now instead of at the end? Sure. Is that all right? So if we go back to the last slide, just so that it's more cohesive and we don't have to flip back. So there's a 10,000 square foot commercial component that's required. Tell me about the scale of that. If it's like, it seems like that could or should scale with the size of the building, or maybe not. If it was a small building, then that could be really big. If it was a big building, that could be really small. How did we, do you know how they got there?
For the lot area already, you have to have at least 20,000 square feet to have apartments or condos here. So thinking size of where these are going to be,
Okay.
that's one thing. Another thing, when I've talked with other cities, having a 5,000 square foot is not what they're not seeing what they are wanting for these areas to develop into. And
Okay.
10,000 is a more reasonable number for what their hopes are.
So 10,000 kind of creates like a feasible critical mass, if you will, for commercial.
Right.
Okay. And all right. Thanks for that.
Counselor McKay?
Javin, on the next page, I had a question. Okay, so on the neighborhood mixed use, like a one family dwelling attached. So does this mean, like, I know that in certain neighborhoods, we've had trouble with people having a recording studio in the neighborhood or having a bakery running out of their neighborhood with like mass traffic and a lot of, like, they're decent sized businesses, they're running out of their home. Would this allow that then in residential neighborhoods?
So thinking where it would be is really important
Yeah.
on that. So I drafted this thinking the mixed use zone primarily would be around Geneva and Center.
But it doesn't say that, right? Like it could be done anywhere.
They could pitch whatever they would want. That would be up to council to determine that. That's kind of what I initially did, thinking of massing and scale for where it's going to be. So thinking that's something I think that's important for that.
Can I jump in?
Reading the, is this called a policy? What is this? Policy? Zoning? Ordinance, thank you. Reading the ordinance though, like it opens it up totally that if I was a business, I think, oh, this is my in kind of thing. Like, you know, we've gotten rid of those businesses in a lot of neighborhoods where they were disrupting the residential areas, I guess. So I wonder if we should have something saying that it's, you know, on, you know, main arterial roads or in mass transit areas, or if there's.
So all of these areas on those maps, like example 6 South,
Yes.
there's bicycle lanes.
Yeah, all of your maps were great. Like I have no issue with that, but is that part of the ordinance that it has to be within those mapped areas, or?
That's generally it. So if somebody were to come in today and I want to do this mixed use development,
Okay,
then I'm going to come in and say, let's just hypothetical example. I'm going to put it in the dead center of Joaquin. That's an RC. That would require a general plan amendment because it does not align with the Joaquin plan, and a rezone and a concept plan.
okay,
Okay, so that's quite a few applications. Instead, if I come in and I want to do a mixed use development that is in an area along 6 South, we're going to look at the major plan and see, oh, this already aligns with our with the plan for this area. So all they would need to do at that point is a concept plan and a rezone application.
okay. So we're not opening it up as broadly as I read it to be.
No,
Okay,
if somebody wants to do that, that's their choice. But it's much more, these are the areas where we've already designated through these neighborhood plans where mixed use development may be.
okay. But it's not black and white. I mean, they could totally apply for that.
Yes, anyone can
They
apply.
can, so it could potentially get through.
It could potentially get through, but I think it's much more difficult when it doesn't align with the general plan.
Can I add something here? I remember there was a big issue with the recording studio, and that was either a minor home occupation or a major home occupation, which is completely different. And there's a ton of rules around that. And it sounds like mixed use, but it's not actually mixed use. And so it's just a different part of the
I
code.
could see someone building it that way, right? To meet the mixed use requirements, to get a home business in a
And
residential.
maybe that's what they thought, and they were just dead wrong about their zone. But you have to apply for a minor and major home occupation, and there's just sheets of rules for that.
Correct.
Do you want to explain the differences between minor,
So
major, and mixed use?
Sure, thank you. Throughout the city, we allow minor home occupations, and anyone can do that. Example, if I wanted to do a daycare, I could do that anywhere in the city. Now, if I wanted to have, we limit that 1 to 6 children. Now, if I wanted to have more than 6 children, but up to 12, that requires a conditional use permit. And so that goes to the public hearing process for that to establish that, because that quantifies as a major home occupation. So in that instance that we're talking about, I can't remember all the details, but it quantified as a major home occupation.
Is there language we could put in this ordinance to make it just so people know they can't do it anywhere in the middle of residential areas?
As in a business? So that's
Like as in the mixed use?
We allow home occupations throughout the entire city. And that's already said in.
Yeah,
in
not,
here.
I'm not worried about that. I guess my idea is you have the one family dwelling can do a neighborhood mixed use.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering about people putting that in the middle of neighborhoods that doesn't make sense, or like where commercial's going later and disrupting
Ultimately, if it's going to go in
residential
a place that's not going to make sense, it'd be up to your decision for that on whether to rezone that or not. I think it's much more difficult when it doesn't align with the general plans that I've shown. And I don't know what staff's opinion would be if that came up for discussion.
Chair, if I may, newcomer, of course, but as I understand it, this ordinance just creates the zone as something that can be,
Mhm.
but the council will ultimately have to select where it goes. And so the council will have some control over where this can occur. And so I think if there are those concerns, they can be managed in the future on a case-by-case basis. Is that?
Correct.
Thank you.
And not, so I know sometimes it's kind of like, well, we've already established the process, and as long as they meet the requirements, we kind of have to say yes. Is it that type of situation, or is it, no? Okay, Keith's shaking his head. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to proceed if that's all right. Thank you. Within apartments and condos and one family dwellings, you may have a commercial component. Example, some of the homes on Center Street have, especially between Second and Fourth East, they could have a commercial component on the main floor and a living opportunity on the upstairs. Building height, the mixed use one would be 65 feet, neighborhood mixed use would be 30 feet. To give an example, the campus mixed use is 75 feet, and the R1 zone, I believe, is 35 feet in height. One thing that we're going to change, we're proposing to change, is the minimum residential unit size. In our downtown zones, we say you need to have a average of 800, but a minimum, but no unit smaller than 500. We're removing the 800 and just doing a unit size no less than 500. These sections of codes come from existing code sections that we have in either our downtown zones for all of these sections, because they are applicable. There is some overlap between these types of zones.
Kevin, sorry. Why do we remove the average of 800? Why do we have it originally? You know, what purpose was it serving? And then why did we remove it? Because Bill got tired of going out there with his tape measure.
Sorry, I was very involved in writing that ordinance. So when we looked at the thing that set it off, the thing that created this as an issue is we had a developer come in and ask about doing an entire building of 300 to 350 square foot units. The city council didn't like the idea of that, an entire building being micro units. So they asked us to look at ways to address that issue. As we compared Provo housing apartment complexes with those in our surrounding cities, it became really clear that we were getting smaller units, more studios and more one bedrooms, while the communities were getting more 2 and 3 bedrooms. I think that's true. I think that's what the data showed us. But if you look at what we're trying to achieve in our downtown and our TOD with other more suburban cities, more urban areas always have smaller units and more studios and one bedrooms than more suburban locations. So while we made that comparison, I think the comparison wasn't as true as it should have been. We should have been comparing other downtown areas or cities with downtowns where they were trying to achieve higher densities. We have at least 4 developers in process or wanting to go into our process who are really struggling to make this square footage issue work. We have one that's going to meet with the Planning Commission in a study session in 2 weeks. That's going to show them an example of a property they have under contract that they can't make work under all the rules we have. So this is going to come up again as an issue. It's going to end up on your desk to make some decisions. but we thought we would loosen it here because we thought in these neighborhood mixed-use areas, that smaller unit would make sense without having to force average unit size. But this is totally up for debate and up for your opinion, your issue on it, your attitude.
How does that impact parking or, parking projections or?
So whether
You
it's,
fit more units in now, right? So that means probably more cars.
yes, so for a studio or one bedroom, which what a 500 square foot unit would be a studio or one bedroom, you need 1.5 parking spaces per unit. The biggest limiting factors when you're designing a project is the parking ratio, the building height, and the setbacks. Those are the three things that yield what your density is going to end up being. So when we start giving further and further parking breaks, we allow for that higher density. When we allow for increased building height, and some of the developers are asking us to increase the building height, it's going to increase that unit density. But they all have to meet that parking ratio. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
So these zones are primarily functioning as a residential zone. And so we added the design standards to be like that. So the neighborhood mixed use will be similar to the VODR zone. The mixed use zone will be similar to the HCR zones and the higher intent zones for that, because it's similar in massing and scales. One thing I do want to point out, and then after this, we're going to go through a lot of photos. I want to illustrate some points, but in our design standards, our definition, we have a definition for a kitchen, and it lists multiple things. But I want to specifically say in these zones, a kitchen needs to include all of these things: a sink, stove, oven, dishwasher, built-in cabinets, as well as we need to include a bathroom, closet, and adequate space for storage items. Now, the subsequent photos, they're all units that are less than 500 square feet. But I'm trying to illustrate some purpose of why, and you'll see. So this one, again, 490 square feet. Point, you can do a lot with with 500 square feet, you have a lot of playroom, essentially. Living area. This kitchen I thought was great because they had a lot of storage space above the cabinets as well. Closet on the right. And more storage. The bathroom was actually really large. And each unit had a washer and dryer. Example number 2, 460 square feet. And to give you an idea, these units are really high end, and they're going for $1,500 to $1,800 a month. Both of these units, though, I felt were like for 1 or maybe 2 people living in there. It could be adequate. This unit doesn't usually have a shelving there, but on the left photo, but this one just had it there. Now this third unit is really small, and the floor plan does not match the photos, but it's the same square footage. And this one I really want to pay attention to. This is their kitchen. They have a hot plate, they have a microwave, they have a sink. This is why I'm calling out what the kitchen needs. I want something to be livable. I want someone to be able to enjoy living here in Provo.
So back to the hot plate.
Yeah.
You're saying that this ordinance would require a bigger
It would require a stove.
stovetop?
Mhm.
Okay.
The other 2 units, they all had stoves. They all like dishwashers. They had what I'm asking for.
Okay. And this might be the dumbest question, but do we define stove in our ordinances?
I'll double check and get back to you. on
Okay,
that one.
I know that's really silly, but I'm just wondering, like, there's probably a lot of different versions of stove in the market, and some are probably legal and some are probably manufactured in places that don't have the same safety standards as the United States.
Or a kerosene stove.
A kerosene stove. And
Yeah, it's not silly at all, because when we lived in Belgium, we had a little stove and we had a tiny convection oven, right?
like a countertop oven.
Whoa, Travis. It was like a double microwave convection oven thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, when I lived in Chile, we had a gas range with 2 burners and it was like on a plastic table. So let's not do that.
Counselor McKay.
I actually question if a dishwasher should be required.
So one of the companies that we work with, I connected with, they do housing for a various range of economics of people. And they found that they were going to take them out and then they decided to keep them. Now they went for the 18-inch rather than the 24-inch, but they still found that their tenants want one. This is the bathroom. Clearly that sink is really small. I really wanted to point that out. This unit is really, really small, but it's still a livable unit. This complex does not have that many, I don't believe it had any amenities at all, but people can afford it without anything with light tech. Again, the kitchen, you can do more with 500 and the other units prove said point.
Can I add something here? I think there might be a question somewhere about like, why does it matter what kind of appliances exist in a unit? But when I think through this, I think if it is livable and it's not just minimally livable, then people, I suspect it might get more investment long-term, right? And it might not get run down because it's like the last option for somebody. But when there's true modern appliances, if you will, or amenities, then people feel like they can stay longer, they don't outgrow it as quickly, and maybe they want to buy one of these units because it is in fact livable.
Right, and I thought long and hard on this, thinking at what point does government say we need to do things, but we're here for the health and well-being of our citizens. And so, all right, this is example number 4, and this one you guys can go to. This is IKEA. Actually, you can walk through this. They have this unit and they have another unit that's 610 feet. And the point is, this is 294. This is about 60 square feet larger than the last unit, but somehow it felt bigger just with the design. And so I just recommend go to IKEA, go get lost in the upstairs, but it felt bigger than the other unit. Now, I'm going to jump back to example number 2. Example number 2, this complex has 500 plus units there in total. Now, their amenities are really, really high end, but the neighborhood mixed use zone would have required 20% amenity space. And no, would require 20%. Just like the campus mixed use and HDR, the neighborhood mixed use required 10%. But I really want to emphasize how important amenities are and how much they can really, you can have a small space, but do you want to hang out in a small space? I don't want to. And these are awesome. Amazing rooftop pool. They had 2 sections for these amenities on both sides of the pool area. I mean, it's just crazy insane of how high end these really are and how that can be something that's really marketable. Because once you get units can be similar, but what you can target are just going to be your amenities. Okay, so looking at our sign code, all of the proposed language for the sign code is existing code as drafted today. We are just restricting it a little bit more, thinking again, where these would be being in residential neighborhoods. And these are the types of signs that we would allow in these zones. A freestanding sign, no taller than 5 feet, and the following signs up on screen: wall signs, awnings.
Sorry, John. So what did you say? This is, what is new here?
Nothing is new code written. It's just the compilation of it is a little bit less than some of our other sections of code that talk about signs. Example, other sections of code, you can have signs that are taller than 5 feet, going up to a taller height and some other things. We just reduce the amount of signs. So we don't want to have a really tall sign in the neighborhood. We want it to be lower, to not be intrusive and with lighting and things like that.
Councilor McKay.
Now, you showed us a bunch of places under 500,
Mhm.
but this ordinance would be the minimum of 500.
Correct. Correct. I don't know if we're to that point yet. I think we're learning by doing. And if things are going to work out, if we're getting the units that we want and how that is, I think it's a starting point. And after being in that unit, that's 239 square feet. I don't know if I would recommend that yet for Provo.
Okay. What was our minimum previously? Was it 800 you said?
500.
Oh, it's always been 500,
The
so that
average-
hasn't changed.
The average is 800 with a minimum 500. It's
Okay.
not changing.
So this is not changing.
This is just an interesting conversation, and I think you're going to see more of it as the market continues to try to respond to demand and increased housing costs. We're getting continued pressure to reduce unit sizes. And so we're constantly hearing developers come and say there's a market for units that are smaller than 500 square feet. And we've had a lot of internal conversation about what does that actually look like, and is that actually livable space, and how do you support it? Because it's one thing to say, sure, we'll allow it and allow developers to cram people into boxes. But I think as stewards of the community, we kind of have a responsibility to make sure that those are livable spaces, right? So we're trying to kind of evaluate a possible list of things that we might be willing to consider if you were going to continue to push the smaller unit size. Like there's a certain percentage of amenity space that you have to have. There are certain things that you have to have done to create storage space for those units. You know, every single unit has some basement storage unit that they have access to, or you've built cabinets into your walls, or there's storage underneath the bed's elevated. And I mean, just we want them to just not give us a box and shove people into it, but to have been thoughtful about what that space actually is and how it works. So, I mean, that's just content. I don't think this is the end of the conversation. I think we're going to see more of it.
Keith? So you mentioned there's definitely a market for, I get it. When I lived in Minnesota, I lived in a studio, probably would have been, I don't know, maybe less than 250 square feet. I'm not sure. And then I lived in Atlanta as well. So there's definitely markets for it. But I guess my question is, you know, given I always hear, oh, Provo has 60 or 70% of the, you know, low income or rental housing in the county. And I guess I'm wondering, why do we need it in Provo specifically? Like, I understand there's a market for it. Why? And I'm not talking the 250 square foot. Sorry. I'm even talking, you know, the 500 square feet that this is proposing. Why does Provo need this? As opposed to, hey, we've already got enough of the, you know, the smaller, the rentals, the lower income housing, et cetera.
Well, first of all, I think it takes a shift in our thinking about what the current living expectations are for people that are growing up into becoming adults compared to what they have been. And if I can talk about Bill, you know, Bill and I were just talking, his unit across the street is somewhere less than 600 square feet. You know, for Bill, it's perfect. And I wouldn't suggest that he's low income, you know, but that's a lifestyle that he likes, that he wants. It gives him access to downtown. He doesn't have maintenance requirements and obligations that he had for years on his single family home in Orem. And he likes that. I think if you ask Bill, he would tell you he's thrilled about the opportunities it affords him compared to maybe what his expectations were in the past. So my perception isn't that we're creating a low income bracket of living units for people to try to shove them into spaces. This is just a new generation of people that have different living standards than what historically you and I might have thought is important. But I also think that just because they don't want a yard and they don't want 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms doesn't necessarily mean that they still don't need to live. And so that's why I think these other concepts of what have you done for your amenity space and to make the actual unit itself livable, because Bill will tell you he loves his apartment, but it doesn't have enough storage. So there are things that he would normally want to have in his kitchen cupboards that he can't because there just isn't room. And that's probably because someone that designed that space wasn't as thoughtful as they could have been or should have been about how do we maximize every single nook and cranny of this space so that it is as functional as possible for someone that wants a micro unit.
So thank you. Along the same lines, the same vein. So we were showing something a while back that showed, hey, Provo does great at this end of the spectrum, and we do great at this end of the spectrum on housing, right? We got a bunch of single family, big homes, or R1A, R110, and we got a bunch of this, which is, I assume, rentals and apartments. where does a 500 square foot studio with nice amenities, where does it fit on that spectrum?
I mean, I think that's starting to approach a little bit of the missing middle that I think you're talking about. I don't think it completely meets that criteria because some of the missing middle will have children. They'll want to have larger space with an extra room or two or whatever. And I think that somehow, and frankly, I just don't know what the solution is to solve that problem until we see some kind of not a housing crash, but a reset in the housing market. But it is important, I think, for the city council to be reflective of, are there legislatively things that we could do? I mean, you have to understand every time, and again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but every time we raise impact fees, every time we raise our licensing fees or building permit fees or anything like that, all of those things create another cost that developers will tell you make it more difficult to do business. When we were down at ICSC in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, the lead commercial broker said, because construction costs have risen so much, time is such a valuable commodity now that developers are literally making decisions about where they build retail facilities based on how long the review process takes, because that's money to them. And if that's one chunk of money that they can cut out of a construction project or a development opportunity because they're going to build somewhere else that it'll take them 6 months to get approved versus somewhere where it's going to take them a year or a year and a half, you're going to lose and they're going to go somewhere else because that's a cost that they can immediately cut, but they can't cut the construction costs. So, I mean, legislatively, I think as we think about these things, we ought to be talking about, are there things, if it's important for us, or those are priorities for us to try to solve those problems that legislatively we could be doing or should be doing to try to help. And again, I'm not saying that I have the answer, but sometimes when we adopt those fees, I don't think we have a full circle discussion about what's the actual implication. Surely increased impact fees help us pay for long-term maintenance. And I totally get that. And I think we're completely justified. If it also increases construction costs and increases this gap for housing or whatever, is that okay? And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but we ought to talk about it.
Thank you, Keith. Councilor Hanley was before you. Now come you.
Yeah, I was just going to say in part response to your question, Travis, I know that a developer has met with me and Bill and others about super small work-live arrangements that are very desirable for single professionals who want to be really close to their to a certain location. They want to be able to work right there out of their space, but they are perfectly happy to be in a tiny, tiny box. So it's becoming,
they want their own space. They don't want to rent with 3 or 4 other roommates. And
right,
yeah.
It's becoming quite an attractive alternative to other kinds of arrangements. And actually, that was kind of my question. So I know Mr. Pepperoni, when we met with Mr. Taylor, you had said that I was looking at my notes to try to remember. You had said that we were sort of waiting on. Is this what we were waiting on? And is this okay? Because you had said that we were sort of waiting on some downtown feedback on, and we can talk later. I don't want to, but if you have anything quick to answer, if you think it's a longer conversation, we can talk later. Okay, sorry.
Can I add a comment real quick? Just back to your question, Councilor Hoban. I don't know that this is meant to be a solution for affordable housing, nor is it necessarily meant to be a solution for missing middle housing. I think what it does is it makes, it gives a little more flexibility to developers for this kind of product, which is desirable for a certain segment of the population. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my thought is, I don't know what my thought is. I was just trying to understand. I was trying to understand why we were making this move, except to just appease developers. And to me, that's not a good reason. Like we should be helping our populace in one way or another,
I think it does help our populace, and I don't know that it is just to appease developers because where I live is probably 600 square feet. I'm not necessarily low income.
Yeah.
And so,
I wasn't asserting all. I'm like,
but I think it provides more flexibility for developers who are catering to a client, and that client is our constituent, is our citizens who want to live here, who want an urban lifestyle. And so putting this kind of product, I think they described this, putting this kind of product like way out in the suburbs doesn't make sense. It makes
Right.
sense in an urban center.
Right.
And with this type of zones, you're going to allow for those personal conveniences within the neighbors that people can walk to, bike to, and other types of things that they may realize, oh, this is great. I can walk down to the convenience, the store down the street or go to the
Counsel-
restaurant.
Councilor McKay, did you have a comment, question?
I do think, like, I think of my own daughter, and she started college and she always wants to live alone. And I think smaller square footage, and making it nicer. The amenities, like you said, not making it a box with just a hot plate. I think it's really important. And I think it is kind of the thing of the future. And I totally support smaller square footage that is done correctly. We need to keep the parking for those smaller square footage. But yeah, I think it's wise, and I think it's really smart to put downtown and mass transit areas, and that'll be really successful because people do want to live alone, but have that communal activity space and a storage, like you said. Very important.
Those amenities photos that I showed you, some of those I took from their said website, because there were lots of people there just enjoying the library or such, and they're using them. They're important.
Sorry, Councilor Whipple. I was distracted by the peanut butter cups that were being passed by me.
A worthy distraction, yes. So I really like the idea of these smaller units and getting rid of the average so that they don't have to do really big units in order to get that 800 square foot average in the same development. But I am intrigued about the idea of maybe in different areas or zoning allowing for smaller ones. I remember when the Super 8 motel across from BYU got turned into all those little legal apartments, and they had like a microwave and a fridge in them, but they didn't even have hot plates. But I mean, there is huge enough demand that they did this thing illegally. So I think that we will have demand for the tiny home things that are essentially in a big unit.
I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of these provisions that you've seen may seem so obvious. They may seem like, why is this in here? That's kind of a no-brainer, but it's because of that project that we've put these things in there. Because in that case, in some units, they did just move in a hot plate and said, there's your kitchen. No dishwasher, no garbage disposal. People were washing dishes in the bathtub, but the hot plate was their kitchen. So that's why Javin has gone through some of these things he's illustrated or described.
So we learned our lessons from the Motel 8. Cool.
To give you an example, one developer said, why do you guys want to regulate kitchens? Why don't you let us do it? And that's why. All right, I'm going to move forward if that's all right. We're amending the parking design standards. Again, I'm going to clarify, no parking ratios are being touched. There is our existing code is for what's required for the bedrooms. But all we're adding here is we're adding in the neighborhood mixed use because it's like these types of zones for the driveway. Fencing standards, again, residential zones, we are just adding in the neighborhood mixed use and the mixed use zones to this section of code. Again, landscaping, they need to be like our existing landscaping code for our MDR HDR zones. And with the MU zone, they may be larger complexes perhaps, and so they may have courtyards, so they're going to be similar language as with our DT and DT1 zones. Are there any additional questions I may answer?
Just as a personal note, so I live in a house that at one point had been commercial and the entire backyard was asphalt. And we still have not recovered the yard from the fact that it was fully paved at one point in time. So when I was reading this, it said the whole back can be paved if you've got, your 4 foot of shrubbery or greenery or whatever on either side and the trees and everything. That's great. But oh man, I'm hating the aftermath of it personally. But my house is one that is in that historic area, kind of like this is designated here. And the justification for putting businesses in there at one point was because they didn't think single families would ever live in this house again. And that was a way to preserve that structure and the character of the neighborhood and still make it useful. but I'm really happy that we live there, even if we've got a terrible backyard.
So with that one, I've got a gentleman I've been talking with, they live in an area that is like that. And they're looking, hoping to maybe use the zone for that area. But, or I've had people call me saying, hey, I want to put a business in the house here and still live up there. Where can I do this? And we just haven't had the tools yet. And I think the more tools we have in the toolbox, the better options we can provide the community.
Are you done?
That is all. Thank you.
All right. Final questions? Okay. Thank you, Javin. No break yet. Sorry. And the only reason we were on time is because we were early for the first few. All right. This next item of business is a presentation regarding a comparison of general fund revenues per capita in Utah cities. John Magnus, Interim Council Executive Director. Hello, John.
Good afternoon, Council. We had done a expenditure comparison, and the council had asked us to go back and look at revenues. Unfortunately, just like the expenditure, comparing our offices to other offices, the revenue ones, even though we're using the general fund revenue, not everybody does their general fund the same. So the information we have, while it's interesting, is kind of useless. I mean, we know what everybody's spending. They're spending what they have to spend, but they all don't have, Parks Department isn't treated the same. Some airports that are treated different, cemeteries. So seeing what goes in their general fund, you also have to see what goes out of their general fund. Next year, when we start this process, we'll look at a better way of actually comparing ourselves with some few of our neighboring cities and get a better picture. That said, I will show you the data that we have for this. So these are the cities we use. Of course, Provo, or American Fork, Saratoga Springs, Pleasant Grove, Spanish Fork, Draper, Lehigh, and West Jordan. We use West Jordan, even though it's in Salt Lake County, because it's a city that's very close to us in size and structure. Now, this is the population graph. You can see we are just behind West Jordan by about 2,000 people. So, yeah, that's a census issue. It wasn't our issue.
What we lose in numbers, we make up in quality.
So this is the general fund revenue per capita. This is this is the general fund revenue that each city has. This is what they expect to bring into the general fund this year for FY23. You can see Provo has the second highest general fund, just behind Orem, just ahead of West Jordan. Again, we use our general fund a little different from other cities. Our cemetery is not part of our general fund. It's kind of a hybrid, so it doesn't come in into our general fund the same way. This is the per capita expense. This is because of our large, even though we have a large general fund revenues, when you come down to per capita, we are $583 is what it costs the average citizen in taxes, fees, or whatever per capita for our general fund. So this is what we're expecting in revenue from every citizen if you do it on a per capita basis.
Councilor Hanley.
Yeah, help me because I'm a little slow with numbers and graphs, but if we're that high in the previous slide, and we're, well, let's see. Okay,
This is
West
per capita.
Jordan, or I'm just looking at what, I'm just trying to figure out why we're so low here per capita. We're pretty comparable to West Jordan and Orem, which were the two competing cities by size, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It has to do with the size of our general fund and you take the amount of revenue we're getting in divided by your population. It gives you a per capita number.
Yeah, it's just interesting in the previous one that the bigger cities are getting the bigger general fund.
Yeah.
But they're quite a bit lower on per capita.
Yes, but we have more people.
Right.
And that's what helps if you take that. Because if you look at
more people also cost more money. They bring in more revenue, but they also mean more services for more people.
Right. And looking through the data when I was doing this, I looked at the revenue streams. We're bouncing about the same. Our expenditures are about $570 something per citizen. So our revenues match. Basically, the revenues, pretty much, this whole chart matches the revenue expenditures too.
Wait, so it's our expenditures that are a little more out of whack? Is that what you're saying?
They're a little lower because we have transfer out and how we bring revenue in. Again, we're not comparing, even though we're saying general fund revenue, our general fund revenue streams are a little different from other cities.
Because of our utility transfers.
Our utility transfers coming in and also how we use our enterprise funds. For some of our, so like the Park District has enterprise funds.
In this presentation, then, do you show us where we're trailing or paling in comparison to other cities of similar size? I would think as the city grows that you get more scalable and you should get more efficient with providing services and such. So why is, Payson, American Forks, Saratoga Springs, why are they doing so well on a per capita basis? It doesn't make sense really to me.
They're doing poorly.
They're charging each of their residents $1,000 a year.
Yeah, they're paying every citizens in.
I thought that was a good thing that you're
American
getting more
Fork.
money out of your citizens. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. Oh, bad joke. That's going to be used against me in my re-election.
Well, if you take Payson, for example.
Okay, I get what you're saying. They're requiring more. I was looking at kind of the opposite. I was looking at expenditures, and I just had a brain tick there. Sorry about that.
Right. As the city gets older and more developed and its budget becomes more sophisticated and you start using enterprise funds, revenues coming into the general fund may be diverted into the enterprise fund, where smaller cities really don't have that luxury. So most everything goes into the general fund and then back out.
But does this number reflect the 583.03? Does that include the utility transfers?
Yes.
Okay. So that's not a false lower number. That's an actual lower number.
That is our total general fund revenues coming in.
Per person.
Taxes, fees, property sales that we have during the year. It's everything.
This basically shows that we are more efficient and we are requiring less and demanding less of our citizens to support the government.
Right. And next year we'll play with the data a little different and actually make something meaningful out of it so we can actually show you how we are compared. Probably won't use the small cities because of they're not as sophisticated when it comes to their budget because they don't have the resources or the staff to create enterprise funds.
Wayne?
Just a couple of quick observations. First of all, we talk frequently about fixed cost and variable cost, and there's a pretty good size fixed cost just being a city, regardless of how many residents you have. If you have 10 or if you have 10 million, there are some fixed costs associated with that. And so that does sort of argue for larger cities having a little more efficiency. The second piece is that we're making the assumption here that revenue per capita really comes from people who own homes or people who rent in our community because it's per capita. But for those of us who have a pretty good size employment base or that have a large business sector in our community, that tends to help defray the cost for residents because a Qualtrics pays a lot more in taxes than the same number of employees if they all lived here. Does that make sense? So again, you look at a West Jordan, Provo, Lehigh, Orem, where there's a pretty large commercial base and employment base that will tend to drive those numbers a little lower, as opposed to a Payson that has relatively small business and employment base. That makes sense? So there are, again, different factors involved in how these numbers all shake out.
Yeah, no, I just wasn't looking at it right, but now I get it. Thank you.
So we have the second highest in population. The general fund is $67 million, just over. We're the second largest general fund. And our revenue per capita is $583.03. It's the third smallest. It's interesting information, but like I said, we're not really comparing apples to apples because we're using a general fund. Next year, we will actually take the data apart a little differently and reassemble it so we can actually compare more things like property taxes, sales tax, how the citizens are actually impacted by our budget, our general revenues coming into the general fund. But this was kind of a quick last minute request by the council to look at it. So it's just a snapshot in time.
Well, this is just an editorial comment, but, and maybe not everyone agrees with this, but $583 per person to enjoy the services of Provo, compared to what I might be paying for my television service, my internet service, that's a pretty good price. That's really amazing to me, actually.
Right.
I hope people understand that in the larger perspective, that these are, that's the money that allows us to live safely. It allows us to have good roads. It allows us to have, our officers and our fire and all of our infrastructure. Anyways, it's pretty good deal, it seems to me.
It is all in all, it is a pretty good number, $583. Because that includes our property tax, our transfers in, and our sales tax. So we do a good job getting revenue. I think next year what we'll look at is actual tax burden on the citizens, and that's calculated a little differently. And we can actually come up with that. What is the tax burden on our citizens compared to citizens in other cities around us? That is the end of it.
Thank you, John. That's very informative. We'll go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back at 2:20.
Recording stopped.
Item is a presentation regarding the relationship between utility rates, property tax rates, and fees. This is presented by John Magnus. Very excited and interested to see what we learn here.
The rest of my council.
Yeah, I don't even know if we have a quorum.
No, we only have 3.
Okay, we'll wait a second. We had 4 until.
Recording stopped.
This is the last one.
At least I know my coat won't get warm. I can keep it chilled.
Yep. All right, now we're ready, John.
Sorry.
Recording in progress.
We had 4 in the chat left.
Good afternoon, council. So this is the last of the 3 presentations. The first one we talked about property tax, sales tax as a percentage of the general fund. The next one we talked about were fees, fees for services and utility fees and how they function and cost recovery and what that entails. Today, we're going to bring it all together and show you how all these work together hand in hand to get a city through a recession. Right now, the United States is facing headwinds depending on which economist you read. It's going to be end of this fiscal year, it could be into the next fiscal year, but they all pretty much agree that a recession is coming, and recessions are just a natural part of the economic cycle that happen. How deep they go and how long they last is an unknown. Nobody can predict it. But we know we are facing headwinds. So getting our financial house in order to make sure that we can go through the next recession without having to cut the core services of the city is very important. So taxes and fees. Sales tax. This is the one that's most affected by a recession. Property taxes, the research shows that actually property taxes will actually keep growing for a few years, even through a deep recession. After the recession ends and the properties that were foreclosed on, we'll see a dip in property taxes, but by that time we're through the recession. And that's mainly due to the fact that the banks will sell the homes for a loss and reduce the value of the property, and which reduces the value of the sales tax or the property tax. But during that time period, they'll keep moving forward. Fees for service, these will be affected. We expect them to be affected as people stop building, stop opening businesses, cut back on what services they need from the city because they can't afford it. We'll lose revenue there. Utility fees behave pretty much like property taxes. People trying to keep their utilities on, power, water, and sewer, so they keep paying those. They'll cut other things first and maintain those fees. But what will happen is they will try to reduce the amount of energy or water they use. That will affect us on general fund transfers, but it will not affect the departments if the department fee structure is correct. And then last thing the literature says is you have to have a healthy general fund balance, because that's how you're going to be able to smooth out the first initial shock, and then you can plan for the rest of the recession. So sales tax. Sales tax is a percentage of our general fund. In fiscal year 20 was 28.5%. In this fiscal year 23, we're now looking at 35.42%. So we're relying more and more on sales tax. This is to fund extra FTEs. This is also to fund the police department. Anytime that we increase services or increase government and we're leaning into sales tax, in a recession, this is going to hurt because this is where we're going to lose the money. Property tax is this percentage of the general fund. You can see it has been on a steady decline since 2015. There was a blip in 2019, but pretty much we have gone from a high of 11%. We are now at 7%. So if we go into a recession, and let's say hypothetically it's next year, it's going to start tomorrow. Recession kicks off tomorrow. And our budget right now is projecting about a 5% increase in sales tax. If it's a modest recession and we're going to lose 5%, what we'll be looking at is about a $6 million reduction between what we project and what we'll actually get in. So that's why sales tax, the volatility of sales tax during a recession is so painful because you're going to have to make that up either through coming off the general fund balance or making cuts to FTEs and services we supply. So sales tax increased while property taxes remain flat. This is from 2011. You can see the orange line is actually the sales tax. The blue line is property taxes. You can see how much more money and how fast the sales tax has grown compared to property tax. Okay, in a recession and sales tax. What the literature is talking about is the residents will reduce their discretionary spending first. It means they're going to tighten the belt where it's pretty easy. It means eating out, entertainment, and going out for haircuts and those kind of services. They'll either stop them or start putting them off. They'll get their haircut instead of every 6 weeks, they might go every 8 weeks, maybe every 10 weeks. They'll push things off. As the recession moves along, they're going to delay purchases of durable goods. Things that they had planned to buy, they're going to put off. So the refrigerators, TVs, cars, those things will all be put into the back burner as they watch this recession unfold and seeing how their own finances are doing. And then travel, which I thought was weird, is one of the last things to fall. And I think when we think about travel, we're thinking about, going on vacation, and they're talking about actually making these Sunday drives, going out and just to go visit people. They'll actually start cutting back on the miles they travel to, just to shrink their expenditures out of their monthly budget. All these are derived from sales tax. Everything that they would do, the gas tax, going out to dinner, the service fees, all that is sales tax. And that's first thing they're going to cut into, is stopping those purchases that actually have a sales tax component to them, which will in turn hurt the city. Property tax, I found was kind of odd. What they're saying is property, buying a home in the United States is like one of the biggest goals. It's still the American dream. And people don't want to lose it. And they feel like they made a commitment to the bank. They're going to do everything they can to keep that house. They'll actually stop eating before they get rid of their house. So property taxes, that's why they survive. Most people have the property tax built into their mortgage payment anyways, and they don't see it. So as long as they're making that mortgage payment, we're getting our property tax. The literature shows that it may slow down a little. People may have a hard time making that monthly payment, but they will do everything they can to keep that house and keep making those payments. So property tax is one of the most resilient during a recession. Fees for services. We'll expect to see a reduction. Slower construction starts means there'll be less building permits, less people coming for plan changes. There'll be less of our working in the neighborhood development services area. Business may go out of business, so we'll lose business tax, business license fees. Those things will disappear, and slower business expansion means we won't see growth. We can actually see traction in that area, and any of those businesses that have to come to us for license inspections, we would expect to see them start to fall away. If the fee structure is done right on this, it's not too painful for the city. Basically, if we don't have people coming and getting permits to build houses, you would expect the development services to cut back on the plan checkers, that cut back on the building inspectors. It's painful because it is FTEs the city would be hemorrhaging, but it's a way of controlling it without going into the core responsibilities of the city, such as public safety. Those FTEs would rather be sacrificed than sacrificing public safety, because public safety is fully funded through general fund, and these should be somewhat funded through the fees they recover. Utilities. This is another one, if it's funded right, if the utility is actually, the fee is based on operation, maintenance, and replacement costs. That's the monthly fee. That's the base fee you pay. And then you pay a fee on top of that for the commodity. For the more energy you use, your price goes up. What the literature says that people will actually start cutting back on their utilities, try to use less to reduce their bill, which is fine because we can actually take that. If they buy less electricity, we can buy less electricity. So we can reduce our costs that way. As long as that monthly fee is being met to cover the O&M and the replacement cost, we'll be fine. How this will hurt us is for Provo is the fund transfers into it, because we're selling less commodities. So, but we shouldn't have to worry about layoffs or a reduction in services in those utilities because if their fees are structured right, they'll be covered. General fund. Literature talks a lot about a general fund balance. Unfortunately, they don't say what is a healthy general fund balance or what percentages, but they do say that the cities that have a healthy general fund, they can survive the initial shock. They can use that general fund to backfill in and get them through the rest of their fiscal year and make adjustments and then plan for the next year, trying to figure out when the recession is going to end, when do you think there's going to be an uptick. It just gives you that breathing room. We have a very healthy general fund, so the city has a very good buffer against having to make drastic cuts if a recession comes. Provo today, we're very reliant on sales tax. And that's nothing on our doing. It's just sales tax has been going up and up and up, and we've taken advantage of that. There is an imbalance though between the property tax and sales tax now because sales taxes increased so much, property taxes are remaining flat. We're seeing this imbalance, and since we're leaning so much into sales tax, when a recession does come, we're going to have to cut everything that relies on sales tax. Property tax would give us a little better buffer against that. Our utility fees, I've looked at the only one I've really looked at is the electrical utility fees. They are very balanced. They do cover their O&M. They have healthy reserves. They have a fund balance for rate stabilization. So in a recession, we expect them to keep operating the same. They just might have to buy less utilities, like electricity on the market, which also would translate to a little less fund transfer to us into the general fund. Fees for service. Even though we looked at it, we didn't go in deep enough. That would be one area that we'd really have to look at and make sure that the fees that we are charging are actually covering our true cost. If they're not, that's a policy decision. The council come back and say, hey, we don't want to charge that much because we want to stay competitive with this, ORM, or we want to reduce the cost for building housing. There's policy reasons we reduce fees, but I can't give you, without doing a bigger dive into it, I can't actually give you any policy direction or options on that other than we need more information to see actually how it's functioning and where we stand on it. We have a very strong general fund balance. That's bodes very well for us. And it was the weirdest thing. So when you read the literature, they keep mentioning cities that own an electrical utility are the cities that survive the best. Cities that don't have it struggle. And they don't really lay it out why. But about 6 articles I've read, they've all mentioned that when they do the studies of the cities that had electrical utility are the ones that actually come ahead in a recession. They still suffer from a recession, but their cuts aren't as deep, and for them it doesn't last as long. They can come out a little sooner and at a better footing than cities that don't own their own utility. And then the other thing that Provo has is its transfers from utilities. We don't charge property because of how the property tax here and how much land is owned by religious organizations, other government organizations that we don't get to tax. We use the transfers as a way to backfill some of the property tax. So that will help us too, even though we wouldn't expect to see a small reduction in the transfers because of people using less of the commodities. There still will be using the commodities, so we still get those transfers. Yeah.
Do you know, you say they didn't really elaborate on this point, but the transfers from utilities, I think most people in Provo, knowing that that's what we do, would say that, that's been a really significant benefit to the city. However, it does have some downsides. I think, in terms of if you're trying to conserve, for example, and that ends up dropping your income, then there's almost a counter incentive to say, well, we don't want to conserve because we need that money. That might be just one example of others that exist. So, and I've never, and then of course there are people who are very cynical about it who will say, well, it's kind of like a hidden tax, right? It's another way that you're getting revenue to the city that through transfers. I guess my question is that one of the reasons why the publicly owned power company is a good idea, because of that option that they have to get transfers from utilities, or is it something
The
else?
researchers don't say, because I don't think they dove into the actual budgets themselves. They were just looking at reduction of services and the income coming, the revenue streams coming into the cities they were studying. They just noticed that the cities that had an electrical utility, their revenue streams are a little more stable.
Well, there's less overhead, right? I mean, it seems like if it's publicly owned, you're not dealing with middlemen who are taking a chunk of profit off of it, right?
Right. And basically the profit is being returned to the citizens.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm just curious.
And also, I've been talking to Provo Power about this, and we still pay considerably less than our neighbors do to Rocky Mountain Power, having our own utility.
So we pay less and we get more in
Yes.
return. Yeah.
Yes. So it is a significant, like it's in our benefit in multiple ways.
Yeah, I mean, I've just always wondered, and I don't have an opinion about this. If I would never want to not have the publicly owned power, but if we didn't depend as much on the transfers as we do now, if that would be a positive or a negative thing.
I think that'd be a negative because you'd have to increase the property taxes even more. Because basically, if you operate it like a utility, which we do, the revenue that's generated from it, the profits actually come back to the city and the residents instead of going off to shareholders. So we can reduce our cost and still can have transfers into the general fund.
And another really interesting thing I learned is that, for example, this is as an average residential customer, we contribute $7 monthly to the general fund. Okay. And the average small commercial customer contributes $50 a month. The average large commercial, like the hospital, contributes $3,000 a month. BYU contributes $80,000 a month. So that it makes a huge difference based on the fact they don't pay property taxes. So we win on both ends as far as residential to kind of make up that difference.
Yeah.
John, can I clarify some numbers with you?
Sure.
What percentage of my property tax bill, remind me, is for the city?
There's three components to it. Hang on, let me grab my. So our property tax there's three different portions. There's one that goes to the bonds. There's one that goes to the library, and there's one that goes to the general fund. And we haven't got the mill rates for this year yet. We won't get those for another week or so.
Can you quickly say what mill rates are?
It's the percentage that we charge this property tax. So we only have FY 2021 right now. The 22. So the portion of the property tax, so for every dollar we get 0.000683% goes into the general fund. 0.001051 goes to paying our obligation bonds, and 0.000496 goes to the library. So the total mill rate is 0.002230.
Yeah, apart from mill rates, let me rephrase my question. For my annual property tax bill that I get from the county, what percentage represents the total percentage that goes to the city, one way or the other?
He wants a pie chart.
Yeah, I didn't bring that book down. Basically,
Wayne might have a comment.
Oh, well, generally speaking, and again, it varies a little bit as taxing entities make their changes, but historically, we've been between 20 and 22% of the property tax bill. It goes up when we do a bond election, goes down when the school district does a bond, and therefore increases their rate. But assuming it's sort of a normal year, it's in the 20 to 22% range.
Okay, and so corollary question, what percent of our general fund revenue comes from property taxes?
right now, for this year, the general fund property taxes will make up 7% of the general
7%.
Total general fund revenues.
Okay, and you referenced, I think, 35.4% from sales tax, right? Then
Yeah, so it's
35.4% of our general revenue funds comes from sales tax, 7% from property tax, you're saying?
Right.
What percentage comes from these other sources, utility fees and?
Let me pull that up.
20 from, is it about 20? Is it about 20 from utilities transfer?
Yeah, utilities a little more than 20. I think utilities this year transfer in for this year will be 13 million. 13 million out of the 64 million. So let's see, it's 10%, 6.1, so 12. So yeah, a little over 20%, right around 20, about 21.
25?
21% will be about.
And you're talking about transfers, not utility fees generally, but.
That's the transfer in from the utility fees, yeah, from the utilities.
Well, I mean, there's two different things, right? One is the utility fees that are paid. The other is what the power department transfers to the general fund.
Right, and about 21% of our general fund.
When you combine those two.
No, that's just transfers in.
Okay.
To the general fund.
21%. Okay. What about the other fees?
Other fees that we charge, we have the franchise fees. Then we have the general fees that come in from the other departments like neighborhood services, neighborhood development.
Generally fees for services.
Yes. There's the RAP tax, the B&C roads. We have our licenses. Then we have fines, and then we have all the miscellaneous, and then other, and that kind of rounds it out.
Okay, so John, so far I've got about 63.5% of our general fund covered. Maybe we do need that pie chart. Is that something that you could?
Yeah, I can get that pie chart. I can send that out.
Get that to us?
Yeah, I can get that done and get it out to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry. We stalled out. Provo today. So recommendations that we have looking through all this. One is to try to increase the property tax somehow slowly over time to bring a little more into balance so we're not so heavily into sales tax. One thing that we had discussed is trying to index it to the Western CPI over a rolling 10-year average. That way you can smooth it out because this year it's going to be pretty astronomical. But prior years when it was less than 2%, we'll smooth out everything. The other thing was to look into our fees for services to make sure we actually have true cost recovery, and then come back to the council and show you what that would look like, what the fees would be, and then the council can make a decision if they feel that having a reduced fee is a benefit. And then the other one is to go through the rest of the utility fees that we didn't go through and to make sure they're actually covering their O&M and replacement costs. We have a lot of different fees, so it would take a lot of time, and we would just pick one section and work through it and then report back to the council on it.
Other than that, just general economic development, right? Anything we can do to increase our tax base.
Just to make sure that the general fund isn't backfilling for fees that shouldn't be backfilling for.
Mm-hmm.
If a business license costs us more to process than we're charging, then we're taking money away from public safety to backfill or another program we may want to pay for out of general funds.
Not talking so much about impact fees, is just generally to the extent we expand local businesses, bring new businesses in. We're talking about more people paying sales tax. We're talking about more employees of those companies. Just anything we do in that regard helps our bottom line, right?
Yes, anytime we can increase our sales tax, but because of the sales tax sharing that we have in the state, we get to keep 50% for of the sales tax that's generated in here, and then the other 50% goes to the state, and then it's doled back out based on population. So yeah, we do have sales tax bleed, but we do recover it. It's not as bad as a state where you don't have any sharing.
That's interesting. I know about the recovery plan, but I didn't know the percentages. So we keep 50, we give away 50. What do we get back out of that 50? So I thought we came out ahead on that.
We do.
Okay, so let me kind of start at the beginning. So all sales taxes in the state are collected by the State Tax Commission. And then they are divided into two pots of money. Every dollar, 50 cents gets put in one pot and 50 cents gets put in the other. And so the point of sale pot of money is distributed based on a city's percentage of the total state sales tax that is generated within the jurisdiction. And so for every dollar you spend at Macy's grocery store in Provo, every dollar of sales tax that's collected there, 50 cents of that comes back to Provo. So the other 50 cents gets put into this population-based distribution formula and then is shared out based on population. And so obviously every bit of point of sale we can generate is an advantage to us. But it's not all that different than the advantage that's created by increasing population in the city. And so right now, actually, if you were to look at, if we went to 100% point of population, and again, it's been a couple of years since we looked at this number, but it's about a $2.5 million advantage to Provo if we went 100% based on population. And it would be a significant difference downward if we went to 100% point of sale. So the balance has been pretty effective across the state in terms of giving local governments the ability to take care of their needs. And so, yeah, so it's complex. We have legislators every year who want to make a run at that distribution formula, and particularly those that are pro housing development. They want to see that number shift from 50% to 100% at some point of population, because then cities are incentivized to build a lot more residential units to grow their population. Historically, cities have been incentivized to build retail. And what hasn't been incentivized ever on the part of cities is to build jobs, because it is a very indirect and slow response to job creation. But we also recognize that job creation is the best way to grow retail. I mean, it's easy to go poach somebody's retail, and we have obviously cities that poach from one another, routinely. But the very best way is to raise the average household income in the community, so that the average household spends more retail dollars in the community. And so, but again, the incentive is very indirect. And if there's any one project I'd love to work on with the state, was trying to figure out how to make sales tax more responsive to job creation. I think it would change so many dynamics of what we do if we could get there.
So let's finish that.
Well, let's let Councilor Hanley had a comment or a question.
Yeah, it was a comment, and that is that, one thing that I from my study that seems to go missing in the calculation of the bottom line is that if we're increasing revenue, say by building more homes in the west side, where we're building new roads, we're building new infrastructure, and so on, over the long term, it actually ends up costing us more than it brings in. If you're building expansively outward and not necessarily doing the infill kind of population growth that is much less expensive to the city over the long term. So that's something to consider when we're talking about housing policies, is that, if all of our growth is going to come from brand new neighborhoods with brand new streets and brand new sewage, the price tag on that is pretty high. And again, the long-term costs are going to be pretty high. Whereas if we build, and I'm not saying this is a categorical argument against new developments. It's just that that's one reason why we ought to be looking at infill development possibilities, because that leans on pre-existing infrastructure. So the cost is the revenue remains the same, but the cost ends up being less. Anyway.
I just had a quick question for Mr. Parker. How often do they re-up those population numbers? And is that census, or are they using other sources?
So every 10 years, it's recalibrated to the federal census. And then the Utah Office of Planning and Budget, and I think actually now probably contracted the Gardner Institute at the University of Utah, does a 2-year population estimate. And then the sales tax is recalibrated every 2 years based on the population estimate. And then it's realigned, I guess, at census time. So, yeah.
A follow-up question, Wayne. We had a good deal of anxiety about the recent federal census
Yes.
because of COVID and who's here and who's not. And how did that end up, in your opinion, in terms of accuracy for Provo City?
Well, we're not convinced it was accurate. In fact, we're pretty convinced that it wasn't. And again, in large measure, because again, the census date is April 1. I wish for a whole bunch of reasons it was January 1. But nonetheless, that's when the Constitution sets the census date. And April 1 in normal years works okay for us because the student population is still here. Now, they're all getting ready for finals and they're distracted. And so sometimes we don't get, census data sent in or logged in online to do. But this year, last year in 2020, when the census was done, now almost 2 years ago, many students went home as a part of the early stages of the pandemic and were sent home in late March, which meant nobody was paying attention on April 1. And if you look at how the comparative growth occurred in the city by census tract, it's pretty clear that most census tracts, except the ones immediately around the university, had more substantial growth than the ones immediately around the university. So we do think there was and again, we're not alone. Lots of other cities in our town gown consortium that we talked to experienced the very same challenge. That being said, there is really no path forward. There are opportunities to challenge the census, but what happened in Provo as the result of the pandemic is not one of them. And so as we've tried to look at the numbers, our major effort right now has been to work with the Gardner Institute to say, we really ought to take a hard look at this before you do your end of 2022 numbers and see the extent to which we can prove there's value in a correction in the in the population estimates for 2022. And those will be done late this year, early next year. So again, we've begun to have conversations with them and the State Tax Commission about how do we make an adjustment that's realistic going forward. So assuming we don't have another pandemic in 2030, we should see pretty substantial growth between 2020 and 2030.
In your considered opinion, Wayne, what was our undercount? Approximately.
That's hard to say. I think as Dixon spent a lot of time working on the census with us, and he may have a better feel than I do, but I think we're in the 8,000 to 12,000 range, probably, that we think we were undercounted.
So the census said that Provo grew 2,800 people in 10 years. There's just no way. Even if you took the old per capita of 3.2, I think they're now saying we're at 3.1 per household. There's just no way that we grew at that rate in the last 10 years. And again, we know how many building permits we've issued in the last 10 years. And if you do the math, it just doesn't add up. Now, certainly household sizes have decreased a little bit, and that's why we think the numbers made. But even if you took the smaller household size and multiplied it by the number of permits, and then that doesn't account for what's happening with the multifamily. And so I think, Mr. Parker's absolutely correct that one, we think we're undercounted in the ability to challenge on the three criteria. One of them would be is that we feel like they counted people in Orem that really lived in Provo. And we don't think that happened. Or that a district was completely missed. And again, none of the criteria and so again, what we're trying to do is establish a baseline saying, okay, we don't like the number, we begrudgingly accept the number, but going forward, what can we do? And again, it's not really with the census, it's with the state who then allocates the tax funds based on population.
It's a pretty discouraging number you gave us.
Well, and we're discouraged in a busload of people too, because we're not the only ones.
So there had to be some kind of appellate process where you can make your case. Did they just turn a deaf ear on your arguments?
No, we didn't bother because based on those three criteria. The other thing that we were told is that
if we give you more number, we're just taking it from Orem or Springville. They won't up the county number. The county number stays the same. And it's like, well,
So it's a zero-sum game, right?
well, that's how we looked at it. Yes.
That's unpleasant.
Darn right. Frustrating.
Well, good luck in 2030.
For somebody.
Thank you, John. All right, next we have Kelsey Zarbach presenting regarding the consolidated fee schedule for the 2023 budget. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you. Good to be here. Today, I'm just going to give you an overview on some of the fee changes that will be taking place between fiscal year 22 and then the fiscal year 23 budget. This document on the screen, this is actually found at the end of the tentative budget book, which is available online, and it will be also included in the adopted budget version as well. So I just want to highlight a few things. I'm not going to go through every fee. I know that in John Magnus's presentation, he mentioned that the council is going to be looking at fees more closely in the next year, which is always great to look at that kind of thing. I will say that having done the budget for a few years now, this fiscal year 23 budget is the budget where I've seen the most changes to the consolidated fee schedule. So I feel like that indicates our departments are, at least several of our departments are in tune to market changes, their costs, and are making changes accordingly. So in effort to try to figure out what fees to highlight, I was just thinking, what would a citizen be interested in? So I'll highlight those. But again, all of this detail is online in the tentative budget book. And then, Malia, if you don't mind pulling up that other document, it's a master version of fee changes. So this is what will ultimately end up in the city code book online. And it will be an exhibit in what the council will adopt when they adopt the fee schedule changes. This is going to be the red line. So if you really want to see the nitty gritty of like what the old dollar amount was and then see the new dollar amount in blue, you can certainly access that. We can make it available to you on OnBase or however you want it. But it will be that exhibit in the next council meeting for you. So going back to that other screen, thanks, Malia. Some of the things that citizens might be interested to know are Parks and Rec fee changes are increasing by quite a bit. And there's also been some restructuring. If you go to this, can I control this? Yeah. So the second page, the rec center. A lot of citizens may be members of the rec center, which is great. None of those fees are changing. But if you're the citizen who wants to go to the pool a couple of times during the summer and you're just going to pay the day pass fee, it's increasing by $1. So going from $5 to $6. So that's a change, and that hasn't happened in several years. Also, when it comes to some of the sports programs that Parks and Rec offer, you have fee changes for adult sports and youth sports. They looked at kind of the market for different programs out in the community and made adjustments accordingly. And in addition, a lot of the part-time rate increases for Parks and Rec employees have been with these employees. And so they adjusted their rates to capture some of those costs. Peaks Ice Arena, they're adjusting some rates like skate rentals, their admission initial cost is increasing by $1. So that might be something for citizens to be aware of. Now, as we move into our utilities, energy, they consulted with legal on kind of how to present their rate structures in the consolidated fee schedule. And Justice Court does something similar, but for a lot of energy's fees, they move them online to a live website. So people can just go in and click on the link to see what energy's rates are. They still have a few that are going to be in the consolidated fee schedule, but that's probably the main change you'll see in energy is just a lot of those are now accessible through a link that is provided in the fee schedule instead of being listed out in detail there. Airport, we all know the airport's a big deal in the budget this year, and there are some fees to help collect some revenue there. For citizens, probably the most relevant fee would be the airport parking fee. It's increasing from $8 to $10 per vehicle per day. So if you're a citizen who wants to fly out of Provo Airport, that's the cost for parking now. Again, there's several other fees, and I don't actually know all of the detail behind all of them. But Public Works has a good understanding, could be able to explain some of the hanger details and the tie down fees. Culinary water. So you've probably been hearing, water's increasing their rates by 5%, right? We've been saying that a lot. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can see what the actual 5% increases are for the water fees, for the pipe sizes and the commodity charges. Something of note is that for the water fees and wastewater, the fee changes don't go into effect until September 1st. All of the other fees, unless noted otherwise, go into effect on July 1st. And the reason for that is residents are already paying higher rate water bills in the summer. And so just to kind of help residents get through those summer months, we don't start the rate increases until September. That's typically been the rationale behind that. And that's similar for wastewater. Again, they'll start their 9% rate increase on September 1st. And you can see kind of what the dollar amounts were in fiscal year 22 and what that 9% increase looks like for fiscal year 23 in that chart. The final fee I wanted to highlight, not so much a fee per se, but I thought it was interesting. So the engineering department reimburses people for street improvements. And so this is something citizens might not be aware of, but if they have curb and gutter improvements or sidewalk improvements that they make, then they can ask the city to reimburse them for some of those amounts. Am I right, Jimmy? Jimmy says it's not correct, so we'll just X that from the record. I must have misinterpreted what I had read. But there was a change to the reimbursement for curb and gutter improvements and reimbursements for sidewalk improvements. I don't know if you want to correct me, Jimmy, or just, we can research that and get back to you, foot in the mouth. Sorry about that. Anyway, for more detail, again, I recommend that you look at the tentative budget book, and you can get to that consolidated fee schedule summary of changes at the end. And then we'll also have that detailed list with the red lines that you can look at. Any questions?
I guess not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Our next presentation is a presentation regarding the council's budget intent statements and priorities by John Magnus, Interim Executive Director.
Mr. Chairman, can I step back to that last agenda item? I did have questions.
Sure.
Kelsey, can we summon you back to the podium? Sorry. I was just curious, based on our John Magnus's prior observations, which of our fees do you feel we are probably not recovering our costs? They still need adjustment.
Yeah, I haven't done an in-depth look. I'd be curious to look at development services, mainly not even to make sure we're recovering costs, but just to make sure we're in compliance with state code, to make sure that we're only recovering our costs. I'm pretty sure we're there, but I've also heard some just talk about how there might be some fees that other cities might be charging for different licenses or whatever that we may not be charging. Again, I haven't looked at this in detail, but that's just something that I'd go to investigate first.
Who would have the best handle on that question? Would it be John Borgett?
John would probably have a pretty good feel for sure. Bill Pepperoni, I know Hannah Maga in their department works with that too.
Okay. I wonder if between John and Bill, if they can maybe get back to us with some their analysis of where we are undercharging.
Yeah.
And where there might be an opportunity to recover our costs fully.
For sure. And again, that's just one thought I had. There might be other places that would be better to start, but I do think it's valuable to look at fees and just kind of see what we can do to improve.
If you would, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we had back in March, we had our meeting, went over council priorities. These are basically the fiscal priorities that the council has that's kind of agreed upon that will go into the budget document. One of the priorities was the housing inventory audit. My understanding is the housing committee is working through that right now with development services, and they think they have enough data, and they're working through that. So we're not expecting an appropriation request from them. Public safety, that was another one of our goals. We wanted, basically, we want to know how in the next 5 years we're going to get the staffing. I have not seen anything in the budget that addresses that. BYU, we redid. Go ahead, George.
Sorry, could I just, finish what you were saying? I just wanted to make a comment about public safety and a question, but
The public safety around BYU, again, that will be the only FTEs we've seen in the budget for public safety are the 2 new positions at the airport.
thanks. I see the chief of police here. I just wanted to clarify two things on those 2 bullet points. The chief and Councilor Ellsworth and I had a conversation about some concerns about public safety around the campus, but clearly that was a pretty restricted conversation to that particular area. So the fact that it's here on this list doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only thing that we feel a new officer could potentially do. And I think you of all people know what a new officer or 2 could do for the citywide. And so I just want to clarify that as far as the council is concerned, that's an area that was brought to our attention by some citizens. We very much appreciated our conversation with you and with the Provo police, but we recognize that there are broader issues for other neighborhoods that if you had more staffing, you could be more proactive on. And so that goes back to the first bullet point, which is an issue that at least as long as I've been on the council, we have been responding year to year, and we've been able to make modest increases, but we have been made aware, I think at least I have since I was first on the council over 4 years ago, that we're always behind, and that we would like as a council to put our police force in a position to be as proactive as possible and to be able to do the kinds of work that would really help reduce, would prevent rather than just respond. And I know that you've been, from what I heard from the mayor, you've been very proactive in coming up with creative ways to help your force work more efficiently. But I think as a council feel that we want to put you in the strongest position possible. And I know that when you spoke to us earlier this year, you were pretty hesitant to ask for a lot. And I could understand why in your, being new in your position and so on. But I just want to both make sure publicly that we're expressing that support. And if you have any specific, any thoughts about what our added help, if we can come up with the means to make that available, you would be able to do with that, including maybe providing better security around the campus, but I'm sure there are other things as well that would be helpful to us.
Okay. Then the section of government administration operations, cybersecurity was one of the priorities. The mayor's budget, the tentative budget does have an increase going to IS department for cybersecurity. They would still need about 2 more FTEs to do the patchwork that you guys had requested. Some councilors had requested some information on how many more FTEs. It's about 2 to get them up to about 80%.
John?
Yeah.
We got a question from Councilor McKay.
That is what I want to mention, because I see on here that, because we are putting a significant amount of our increased budget into cybersecurity, but we haven't addressed on here the patches and up-to-date stuff, which, makes a big hole in our overall.
Right. There's still a need, but with the limited resources the mayor's administration had, they did put resources into that. The biggest chunk of the resource of our revenues are going into the Provo employees. That is that 5% COLA that's in the tentative budget, and also the market rate study that affected about 40% of the employees. So that was one of the council's goals. The budget matches it very well. The general fund reserves, the council still wants those to be growing. So, and we haven't looked at that because we haven't got the final year. We won't see that until the end of this fiscal year to see what the carryovers, how much is being moved around. Just go down a little. Yeah. Parks and Rec, the regional park was a priority. There is nothing in the fiscal 23 budget for that. There is discussions ongoing about using ARPA funds. Same with the implementation of Rock Canyon Master Plan and the update and the implementation of the Slate Canyon Master Plan. The regional sports park is going to be funded currently through a 5-year CIP. If we dedicate some funds from ARPA into it, there may be a possibility to move Rock Canyon and Slate Canyon up on the CIP list. Currently, Parks and Rec did not receive any added revenue from this year's budget. Transportation is another one that did not get any added revenues from this year's budget. And then the last one is preservation of open space. Again, and it's the same thing. It's just there's not enough revenue with that 5% COLA and the 40% merit increases across the agency. That just took up the lion's share of our increase in revenue for this year. So this would be the document that we sign and send off, and it would be part of the budget documents. Does anybody need to change, take stuff out, add?
Councilor Ellsworth.
This might be a futile question in some ways, but I just wondered, does everyone on the council or do 4 councilors feel committed to each of these elements, right? I mean, if hypothetically, if we voted on each one, would these all come up? And are we being a little too inclusive maybe in our support, too broad, given some of the constraints that we're experiencing?
I'll respond for myself. I'm comfortable with all these headings. Obviously, I feel more strongly about some than others, just like all the rest of us. You know, this isn't prioritized by any sense. It's just a list of things that we care about. I take it there hasn't been an effort to prioritize them. But
Okay.
I personally don't object to anything on the list. I will say this, and Shannon, this goes to your district. I've been a little surprised by the lack of fervent support for roundabouts on Slate Canyon Drive lately. The impression I get from people in that area is they would much rather pay for one zoning compliance officer dedicated to that neighborhood more than a roundabout. Have you picked up anything on that?
No, I think that there's a variety of opinions and it depends on where you live, whether you live on Slate Canyon Drive or whether you live on a road that feeds exclusively onto Slate Canyon Drive or whether you live a half mile away. I think there's a myriad of issues there. What needs to be looked at specifically, what this addresses, is speeds. So there's a handful of other issues, but this is a speed management opportunity. This is what Public Works has endorsed. They haven't endorsed other speed management controls. So that's why I'm supportive, is if we all throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, it's not exactly what I wanted. It's not exactly what maybe a lot of people want, but if it's a speed management element, then I support it because that's been a huge complaint.
Well, don't misunderstand me. I care about both the baby and the bathwater.
Thank you.
What I wanted to say was that for a lot of people there, their largest grievance is the absence of zoning compliance enforcement. And I wonder if we ought not to add that in addition to the traffic calming measures as a high priority in that particular area.
Here's my response. We did that last year.
And
Here's my response. Last year, when we wrote our priorities, one of the top 2 priorities, I believe, was additional funding for code enforcement and getting that to 100%, filling all the positions. And I worked with Dave Sewell for 2 straight years to come up with recommendations that were implementable, that were workable. And we added more funding, and Dave Sewell and I both advocated, and the council supported that as one of the top 2 priorities was code enforcement. Have we gotten a report from the administration on how that money was used? No, we don't. I don't know what the outcomes were, but we don't have any KPIs. We don't have any metrics for that department of how we want that money used, what we're getting for our money. We don't have that almost anywhere. So I think that's an important conversation. I think it's a little bit of a separate conversation. And I think that we've done what we can within the frameworks that we have to support code enforcement there. But I think that that's a broader and separate conversation.
Well, I certainly applaud your and Dave's efforts last year, and thank you for that, and that we got some additional funding. I just don't have a sense of how effective it's been. We do see reports now from the zoning administrator, and that's helpful. Seems to be responsive to some citizen complaints I've seen. I just don't know if we've got enough manpower or focus to cover the waterfront yet.
Well, why don't we bring that back in a different work meeting and talk about the progress, assuming they've made progress, what progress has been made, and see where our money has gone.
I'd be all for that.
Okay. I think that might be a little bit separate from this, but I understand what you're saying, and I always appreciate your support for Southern Provo.
Maybe I'll just add a few thoughts. Yeah, I'm supportive of everything on this list, and like Bill, might have some priorities over others. It's hard to know when push comes to shove. If I have, $50,000, where am I going to spend it first? Or if I have $5 million, where is it going to go first? But I would like us as a city council to solve the bullet point that I was addressing earlier about the 5-year plan for police officers in the city. I just think we've been, like I say, responding year by year, which I think and we've been responding in a supportive way. And I think that's led to some positive changes. But until and unless we say we're very serious about making sure that we are ensuring that public safety with a plan that is implementable year after year, and we know where that revenue is going to come from, and we're committed to it, then I'm afraid we'll just bypass it, or we'll just sort of respond in a pinch to whatever comes. And if we've got the good fortune to have some sales tax revenue that's there, I think what worries me is that we've made those decisions in the past based on relatively good years of sales tax. But that's a financial commitment that if that sales tax revenue goes back down, we're not going to get rid of police officers. Like you were saying earlier, we might have to go to other priorities to make ends meet. I'd hate to see that happen. I'm just a little nervous about the fact that we've expanded our commitment to public safety through sales tax, and that has made us vulnerable to be able to do it sustainably over time. So, and we've been talking around this in previous meetings, but we're at crunch time now to have that conversation.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to state an emphatic amen to what Councillor Handley has said. Public safety has got to be our number one priority, the number one priority of any municipality. And we do need a longer term plan. And I'm as anxious as he is if we hit a recession and don't have the financial capability to support law enforcement, particularly in these times when we're looking to not just expand the force, but make sure we're competitive salary wise. So thank you, George. I agree.
Other comments? Thank you, John.
Okay, then I will send this letter and transmit it over to the mayor's office for the budget document.
Thank you. Next, we have a presentation regarding current budget changes and reconciliations requested by the council. This is Kelsey. She's back. Hang in there, everyone.
She's getting her winter coat on too.
Yes. There's only one item left after this, so.
Okay. Yes, I'm ready for this. So this is, I want to give to you a reconciliation of changes that we have made to the budget since you were presented the first version of it on May 3rd in the tentative budget. We try to not make all of the changes like incrementally. We try to like save them for meetings like this, so that way we're not just throwing little things at you here and there. the budget is basically a living document. So as much as I'd love to just give you the final version at the beginning of May, after we get that out to you, I sent emails to directors and departments just to say, hey, can you look at the tentative budget, see if you see anything that looks off, let us know. And then they would give us feedback. So we had a few changes because of that. We also had some new information just come in like, oh, we need to cover this expense that we hadn't realized, or we're getting this revenue, So there's just a lot of things that go into the budget. It's moving. And so the 2 pages in this document, which we'll get, thanks, Malia. So there's like all the detail, all of our lovely debits and credits that you can look at with color coding that kind of indicate whether it was like a correction or just new information. And that's why it was added. There's 2 pages, but I wanted to give you just a summary right here because this is really all that it is. When you get into the budget, it's like if you make one change in one place, usually it's going to affect somewhere else. And so this hopefully is a little less overwhelming. I just want to highlight what the changes are and give you some dollar amounts just so you have an idea of what has happened since May 3rd. So first of all, laptops for 2 new airport officer vehicles. If you remember, one of the supplemental requests from the police department was to have 2 airport officers or officers dedicated for the airport. We got the salaries in the budget, we got the vehicles in the budget, but there's a cost for laptops that go in the vehicles that wasn't included. So that had an impact of about $1,336 that affected the general services fund and then vehicle replacement fund. So hopefully you can kind of see which funds are affected under each of these categories. The next one is the Kayenta Cube. It's just a feature of Kayenta that departments will be utilizing to get better data out of Kayenta. And it was only $6,953 that kind of was shared across departments, but it affected general services, information systems, customer service, water, energy, sanitation, and stormwater. So again, you're going to see lots of lines on the reconciliation spreadsheet, but really it was just to kind of accommodate the ins and outs of that $6,953 for that Kayenta Cube. ARPA, a big one, the council requested and we implemented this now. So if you've changed your minds, we can always adjust however you want to do this. But we have $12 million in ARPA money that was budgeted in grant revenue for water that we took out of the revenue. And then we also removed that $12 million from the CIP for water. And so that's basically out of there at this point. In addition, there was $51,635 in ARPA revenue. If you remember, we had built some ARPA revenue into the budget to help cover positions that had been cut out of, I think it was the fiscal year 21 budget due to COVID-19. The way that we have it set up in our budget spreadsheet is we link the total to the employees that were cut or the positions that were cut. And we had accidentally link the ARPA revenue needs to an employee that made a higher salary amount who wasn't the actual employee we were trying to get the data for. So it was just the person below her. Anyway, so basically we saved some ARPA revenue there by making that correction. This one affected several departments, the payroll market study. So we implemented most of the payroll market study adjustments from HR in the tentative budget, but we did get several, I think it was the day or two after the tentative budget was presented, that affected public works departments. And so those market study adjustments are now being included in the reconciliation here. There's a payroll update in Justice Court. There are a couple employees who we get their actual salary allocations from the state, like the state tells us how much they should be paid. And so we didn't get that information until a couple weeks ago. So that's been built in. Covey Center grant. Originally, the Covey Center had built in $2,750 for grant expense, but after kind of talking with them about it, they hadn't actually secured a grant with the revenue attached to that. And typically with grants, we don't budget for them in the expenses until we know that the revenue's been secured. So we just took that line out. And if they get the revenue, great, we'll just add it to the budget according to the budget ordinance when that happens. This one was kind of big. The business licensing moved from community and neighborhood services to customer service. So basically customer service has been handling a lot of the licensing for the city. And this was just an effort to kind of make it a little bit, have it make sense, move the business licensing to customer service. And so that freed up some funds in the In community and neighborhood services, added some budget to customer service and so on. We're almost there. There were a few positions in the council where the COLA hadn't automatically updated in our spreadsheet, so we just made that correction. It was about a $3,000 impact there. Police market study. There were 2 employees where the market study, like one employee had the market study when they shouldn't have gotten the increase and the other employee was supposed to get it. So just making that correction was a $500 impact to police. Parks and rec corrections. This one was kind of big. So if you look, I don't know how well you can see, but toward the bottom, there were a few things with Parks and Rec with their adult sports and their youth sports functions where some of the part-time hours hadn't been budgeted properly. Those functions often share part-time employees. And so there had been some miscommunication about like where the employees were budgeted. So I think they thought all of the hours had been budgeted for in one function, but they should have been spread out across 2. Anyway, it had quite a big impact for part-time payroll costs for Parks and Rec. And that was something that was caught recently. So the detail of all of that is there if you're interested. Going back to the library now, we realized that there had been an employee, the position had been in the previous year's budget, but had accidentally been removed because there wasn't an employee currently in the position when we were preparing the budget. So we added that back in at their request. It was consistent with what had been in the fiscal year 22 budget. So we were just making that correction. Just a few more. Water. This is something that Public Works found for us. So wastewater, if you look in the wastewater fund, there is a transfer to the water fund that was already budgeted in wastewater, and that was correct. But on the other side of that, the water fund didn't have the transfer in coming into their revenues. And so the expense had been budgeted for in wastewater, but water still needed to recognize that revenue. So we made that correction. That was pretty big. It was $583,820 that water now has in their budget that had already been accounted for in wastewater.
Can we look at that other view? I like it where it shows that's better.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, again, some of these like would cross and affect different funds. So we can flip between these 2 screens however you want. Energy, let me put on my glasses so I can see. Energy though, right here. There was an operating expense correction of just $1,500 where they realized something had been left out that they typically budget for. So we made sure to get that back in. Ice sheet over there, they had been looking at their revenues that had been coming in for this year and realized that they should be budgeting for more revenues next year by quite a large amount. If you look, $390,000 increase there. And so then they redistributed some of those increased revenues into their expense budget, mainly for some part-time staff. There were some operating expenses that they had. And so anyway, they were able to just balance that out and they have a net positive for the revenue still. Just a few more things. So sanitation, if you look, the big one at the bottom, this was another situation where it was in favor of sanitation. Yeah, in the budget book, there's a line for transfers. Was it transfers out? Yeah. And it was accidentally double counted. It was like $705,000. And so Jimmy was so great and said, wait, they shouldn't be transferring out that much money, 1.4 million. And so we cut that in half and fixed it. So they're in good shape. Finally, the police lease bank let's see. I don't know if it's all here. Is there a way to scroll down on this, Malia, at all? Or, oh, it's at the very bottom, yeah. So if you look at the vehicle replacement fund, so this was something that Public Works had caught before the tentative budget, and then we had just missed an email and forgot to get it in. So basically in the fiscal year, some of the police vehicles that had been on the list for replacement in fiscal year 22 had accidentally been included as vehicles that also needed to be replaced in fiscal year 23. So they were fiscal year 22 vehicles were double counted, and we didn't need to budget for them in fiscal year 23. So we took those out, and then it saved vehicle replacement fund $374,000. So if you look at the total at the bottom on the far right, basically we're at a $1.35 million positive in savings for the budget, or revenue increases, however you want to look at it. And again, that really had a lot to do with the vehicle replacement fund, the sanitation, and then the water transfers. Those things had kind of that big impact. But again, the details here, if you're curious, if you have any questions, we're always happy to answer them, talk you through exactly what happened. So anyway, I know this is the first time you've seen this, and so feel free to ask questions now or in emails, or we can meet with you later, however you want to do that. So.
I think you did a pretty good job, Kelsey. Any additional questions? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, could you scroll back up to the vehicle replacement again? Oh, I'm sorry, it's right in front of me. I'm like, oh, there it is. Okay, sorry, I just didn't get a good look at that. Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Our next item is a presentation regarding potential new budget changes. Presented by Malia Daly, Policy Analyst. No. Presented by John Magnus, Interim Executive Director.
Relatively quick. So if you guys have seen the tentative budget, these are all our presentations. We are done with the budget. Unless there are any more questions, any proposed changes that you guys would like to see to the budget or anything, we would ask that instead of a individual counselor asking us to make the change or proposing some kind of change, that it would be the council as a majority would send those along to us. That way we know for sure that it is the council's desire to make these changes. And tonight will be the first hearing of the budget. We'll have to have we'll have two hearings. If you do the truth and taxation, that changes some things, but tonight would be the first night. And if you want to make those changes, we would ask that there would be a vote on any of the lines or any additional funds to be moved around. We would ask that the council as a whole do it, not just one or two council members. And that's pretty much it. We're just going to prep you for tonight. So if you have any questions between here and tonight, go ahead and contact staff and we'll try to get them answered for you.
No curveballs for you. All right, George.
Well, we've talked about truth and taxation a couple of times already. So what would, if we were to have a conversation about that tonight, what information would be the most helpful? I'm sort of asking the council for us to have that conversation later this evening. Or you, John?
The easiest way to happen, if you guys want to do a truth and taxation, would someone would make a motion tonight to start the truth and taxation timeline, because we have certain things we have to do. We have to meet with the county. We have to have some more meetings, set that into motion. And then we can finish the hearing on the hearing on the tentative budget that we have. Then basically the budget for the city will be postponed until August. On the 21st, we would come back to you to pass the RDA, the stormwater, the fees, and the pay scales to get those taken care of out of the way, and also to adopt all the changes that Kelsey just showed you into the tentative budget. So the tentative budget will reflect what the final budget should look like. That way we can operate on that from July 1st until we pass a budget after the two hearings. So first week in August, we would actually pass the new budget.
So between now and then, we would have time to be looking at specific numbers, specific revenue.
Right. If you were
targeting where we would want that revenue to go and that sort of thing.
Right. The new revenue generated by the property tax increase could be programmed. Again, that would be us communicating with administration where you would like those increased revenues to be spent.
Okay, thanks.
3 questions for you along those lines, John. What would be the nature of the motion tonight to get the ball rolling?
I would ask Brian, but he's not here. So Gary? Oh, he's on Zoom. Brian's
Yeah,
on Zoom.
and he can certainly weigh in. We've talked about it a little bit, but I think a lot of it depends on what you elect to do. If you want to go to truth and taxation, and that's the motion that's approved, then it triggers this process where those hearings have to be noticed, the county has to be notified, and those hearings held. During that time, you also have to adopt either last year's budget or the tentatively adopted tentative budget that we've been talking about for a while now, to function through that August date when final decisions are made on next year's budget. And also one more very important thing, you have to say in the motion what percentage increase maximum you're interested in imposing.
Percentage of what?
Of that tax.
Talk about the mill rate?
The mill rate.
Yes. Yeah. Let's see. It's a percentage basis of real property is my understanding. Let's see. I think I might actually have the figures.
Between you and John, we could probably come up with that language, but let me put a finer point on it. Would the motion tonight be a motion to simply start the process or the discussion, or does it need to be a council commitment to the hearing? That we're going on record saying we want a truth and taxation process and we're committed to it.
We may need to check with Brian, but I think you have until the end of June to trigger it. So you could, is that your understanding, John? I think you could wait 2 more weeks to actually do it.
Right, we could do it at the 21st meeting.
Brian's online.
And I guess that would be my suggestion. If to your point about commitment, Councillor Fillmore, once you pass the resolution, the process is triggered. So if you're not committed to triggering the process, I would wait until the 21st to make the motion. Now, having said that, once you trigger the process, you're not committed to raising the tax rate. You can hold the hearings and then in August pass a budget that doesn't raise property taxes. But once you make a motion to start the process, you're starting the ball rolling for noticing those hearings and changing the deadline of when the budget is due. So then you need to follow through on that, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Brian. Are you in a position to help us word that motion? Or
Yes.
Give Gary some guidance?
Yeah, Gary and I have been talking about it, and we can follow up. You're talking about before tonight rather than at this moment in time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, next question, John. My understanding, I don't want you to confirm this if you can, that if we were to propose an increase in the mill rate, that it comes to approximately $3 per average household per year based on a 5-year rolling average?
We had proposed to using a 10-year rolling average of the Western CPI. It's about $3.50 to $4. There's 2 models we can use, which we'd have to discuss and figure out which one you want to use. And it would raise between 145,000 to about 195,000. We don't have the new mill rates from the county yet. We don't expect them for another week or so. They always get them to us right before the adoption of our budget.
Okay, so 10-year rolling average based on the Western CPI would generate first year, it's implemented 145 to 190,000.
Yeah, depending on which model we use.
Okay. And what would be the process for having an I'll call it quasi-automatic CPI inflation adjustment on property taxes on an annual basis? Sorry, Elizabeth. Say, what are our options to create well, there is no way to get an automatic increase, but what are the possible methodologies for making this an inflationary adjustment that could be expedited on an annual basis just to keep us current with inflation as a city?
We could write it into the city code, create an ordinance, a new section there would be an automatic truth in taxation unless the council took an affirmative action to postpone it. We can do that every year or every 2 years, but you could always get a council who could come undo that ordinance.
Sure.
We cannot tie the hands of a future council.
So automatic inflationary adjustment annually, subject to council rejection.
Or a repeal of the ordinance.
Yeah, have you reviewed that with Brian or technical elements?
Brian and I have discussed it. We haven't fleshed it all out, but discussing it, we think it's possible that we can make it work. We could write the ordinance in such a way that it would work. But we would have to finish. We'd actually work on it. We didn't go any further than the theoretical discussion if it would work.
Would you have time today to work with Brian and Gary to get something together?
Probably not. And we wouldn't have time to notice it. So we would have to come back on the 21st, but we would have plenty of time between here and August to get it written if the council so desires to create that.
Are you saying that that particular methodology doesn't need to be part of tonight's motion?
No.
Okay.
That would be totally separate.
Yes, I understand it. All we would need to know is what, if we were to do this, what the maximum amount that we would state now would be part of that hearing.
Right. And I can give you the rolling average, 10-year average for the Western CPI.
Yeah.
May's not in yet, but we can back it up to April's and use April's numbers.
But we could always go below whatever we propose. So if we said, it's, if you're looking at 3.5 to 4, and we said, well, okay, the maximum is going to be 5 or something like that, then we would.
Right. The maximum would be like 5%, but I can give you what we think it would be and probably give us a 0.5 point buffer above it. Just because we don't have the
right. Yeah. We would want to be high enough.
The property valuation yet.
Brian Jones.
Thanks, Chair. So, John, I was looking at, and I talked with Gary about this earlier. I was looking at the statute earlier. The notice that we have to publish doesn't even require us to notice the proposed mill rate. What it requires us to notice is the proposed percentage by which the property tax budgeted revenue is going to increase. So that's, I think, the number that we actually need. Since we don't even have the mill rates from the county yet, I think what they really need to decide is we want to hold truth in taxations on increasing property tax budgeted revenue by 2% or whatever the number is.
Okay, we can figure that. We can figure that out. It gives us enough time to get that done for tonight.
All right. Any additional questions? Discussion? Okay. Thanks, John.
I'll take care of it.
At this time, a closed session has been requested. Yeah, Gary, do you want to do the closed session? I'll call it a preamble. I don't know what you call it.
Sure. I understand that a closed session has been requested today. Under Utah Code Section 524205, we can move to a closed session. I understand it's a discussion about personnel issues, which is permissible under the statute.
Dang it, I got distracted. All right, so at this time, closed session has been requested. Do we have a motion? Oh, Brian?
Sorry, I just haven't lowered my hand yet.
Dramatic pause. Do we have a motion to close the meeting?
I'll move to close the meeting.
Councilor Whipple moves to close the meeting. Second? Seconded by Councilor McKay. All in favor? It's unanimous in the chamber with Councilors Shipley and Ellsworth excused. We will now go ahead and move to a closed meeting.
Record.